Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Gert Franz, astrophysicist and expert on Lucee CFML. In fact, he's the evangelist for it. When I said astrophysicist, I think he did that like 25 years ago. So we won't ask him any difficult questions about the galaxies. But we will be asking him a lot of questions about debugging templates and Jedi tricks he has for debugging and error handling. And also look at how you could write your own debugging templates and why you might want to do that. And also, we'll be asking him a bit about CFObjective, where he's going to be talking about debugging templates. And also, ask a little bit about Lucee and Rila and all kinds of other ColdFusion related things. So welcome, Gert.
Yes, welcome, Michael. Long time no see. I guess it's about 3-4 weeks ago, right, when we have met.
Yes, I think there was some Texan barbecue being served, or maybe it was a mariachi band at the Into the Box conference.
Exactly. And regarding astrophysicists, I studied astrophysics. That's true, and I can tell you, once I visited a client who has a lot to do with astrophysics, and I was presenting Rila back in the days, and I remember at the end of the talk, I got nervous because I was thinking something like, okay, when they're going to ask me questions, they're going to kill me with the questions like, how fast are the electrons moving when I'm doing a CF output or something like that. And so I did my talk, was ready, and then afterwards, people were asking me, raising a question. I got nervous like crazy. They were saying, do we need to install ColdFusion to run Rila? And I went, oh God, really? So that was really funny, and that kind of was my extended thing that I got in touch with astrophysics, more or less. So I just have my telescope at home, which I sold recently, but I'm going to get a new one. That's my extended doing astrophysics lately. And maybe
I just have
go ahead.
Yeah, I just have an imagination that you could get, Lucee running on one of those Raspberry Pi computers and have it control your telescope. Have a whole
that is true.
ColdFusion application for taking photos and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is possible, especially when I see what Brad Wood is always doing with his Raspberry Pi. I think that is a great thing, and I'm pretty sure that can be done. But as I told you before, I'm very busy doing nothing, and therefore I have no time for that. Now we're doing tons of other things. We have at Rasia, where I work, we have certain products in the pipeline coming up, all having to do with performance. And if you are at CFObjective and you want to learn anything about those products, just come and visit me or come and ask me. I'll be there to show you the latest and greatest of what we're doing.
Well, I know you're a performance expert because we chatted for an hour or two in Houston about how to optimize stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. That sounds really interesting. And I never did astrophysics, but I certainly did a lot of mathematics. And I did bump into Stephen Hawking a few times because, he was in the next door college to mine and would trundle across. So...
yeah, that is really that would have been one of my dreams. That actually was my original dream when I came from Romania. When I came in '82 to Germany, I saw the space shuttles flying or launching from Cape Canaveral, and I told my dad I'm going to work for NASA once, and he said, "Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, do your thing." And then, no, really, I completely aligned my life to work for NASA later on in my life. So what I did is I had math and physics in my high school as my main subjects. Then I went to university in Munich and Karlsruhe in Germany to study astrophysics. And afterwards, I wanted to really go to maybe, I don't know, somewhere in Boston or in Houston or somewhere in Florida and work for NASA. But anyway, I was starting programming in the meantime, and I made pretty decent amount of money. So I said, oh, screw astrophysics. I'm never going to stand a chance anyway. So I started programming, and over the longer time, it brought me to ColdFusion and to Rila and to Lucee. And in 2011, when we were at a CF conference in Washington, Curiosity landed on Mars. And we knew that people were downloading from NASA. They were downloading the software. So we thought, oh, that would be great if those guys would use it, because we knew they were using ColdFusion a lot. So anyway, the Curiosity landed, and 2 or 3 days later, there was a press release from Amazon saying they were only able to manage those 4 million sessions simultaneously with Amazon Web Services and Rila. And we went, what?
Wow.
Was that right? Oh, okay. Well, anyway, so I got involved with the guys over there, and so they invited me, gave a lecture, some support, and all that stuff. Came home, picked up the phone, and called my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm working for NASA." It's about 30 years later, but it worked in the end. So that was kind of my closing the loop after 30 years.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm all into. Since day one with Lucee, or with Rila back then, we were all into performance. Everything has to be performant. And one of the most important things that I was using since day one was debugging information. And for a long time already, I wanted to do a talk about what to do regarding debugging and how to use it and stuff like that. So that's why the talk came alive, or actually will come alive.
So what exactly is a debugging template?
Well, a debugging template, let me put it this way. When you execute a page, or when you call it a request, Lucee does, or ColdFusion do, a lot of things in the background and collect information along the way, as long as you have debugging turned on. Turning on debugging is pretty simple. Just go to the admin and tick a box. Now, in Lucee, there's a couple of differences. What you have is debugging turned on allows you to collect the information. It doesn't output anything. For the output of that information, you need a so-called debugging template. And this debugging template is something that formats the information that Lucee collects in a way that you can better read. And we're all maybe familiar with the ColdFusion debugging template. And so I looked at the information a lot in the past, 10, 12, 13 years. And I even added a couple of things that had to end up in the debugging information. So it is always good when you're sitting kind of close to the source, when you're kind of part of the source, and you can define what ends up in the debugging information. So writing an engine like Lucee or Rila back then, or being in the team that writes it, allows you to have certain influence on the things that end up in there as well. And a lot of people are underestimating the information that debugging can give you. So to get back to the question that you have, what is a debugging template? A debugging template is just kind of the HTML and CSS that formats that structure that you receive from Lucee or from ColdFusion in a readable format into a web page, right? That's a so-called debugging template. In ColdFusion, there are, I guess, 2 or 3. There was one which was sending it to, I suppose, the Flex, to some kind of Flex client for Ajax debugging. And there is another one that is called Classic, as far as I remember, which is just adding it to the bottom of each page. And there is, I guess, another one which is using comment, where you can have all the information in an HTML comment inside your HTML source, right? So that is more or less a debugging template. Okay.
Okay, so it's what gets fired when the CF error tag tells
no,
you
it's
where
not
to
the
go.
CF error. No, not the CF error. That is the error template. The error template is template that is called when you have an on error or something, or CF error. That is the error template. You can set that up. Yeah. But the debugging template is the stuff that is below your page, where it says these amounts of queries, pages, and how long did they take to execute.
The thing that you turn on for certain IP addresses, or however you control it.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, that's debugging and debugging template. right? It is not the
So
same as a step-by-step debugger. It is just a
Mhm.
post-debugging kind of. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So why would someone want to turn that on and tweak around with it?
To be plain and honest, I have it on all the time, even on production sites. Now, people are going to say, are you crazy? You're disclosing information there and what have you. Well, first of all, you can limit those things to IP addresses. And second of all, at least in Lucee, the amount of time it takes to process the debugging information and output it is next to zero. It still has, let's say, 1 or 2% of overhead, but the information that you have from those debugging templates is really invaluable. I remember the first days when we were programming Rila back in 2003. We had our first version of Rila running, and the way how I was measuring the performance between, what was it, not a layer, who bought it from after a layer?
Macromedia.
Macromedia, yes, from Macromedia
Yes.
ColdFusion versus Rila back then was about 6-1. So ColdFusion was about 6 times slower back then than it was. They have improved a lot, so no worries. And maybe it's our fault as well that they had to improve, but that's fine. And I remember that it was 6 times slower. And the way I was measuring that was with turning on debugging. What I haven't taken into account is that the debugging in ColdFusion, at least back in the days, is adding about, in that case, 50-60% overhead. So when I turned off debugging and just did a get tick count thing, it was only 3 to 4 times faster, which kind of was dissatisfying, but still it was good enough to launch it into a new product. So there is a difference if you do that in ColdFusion versus Lucee, turning on debugging or not. If you have some kind of codebox application which has thousands and thousands of methods, calls, and what have you, the debugging really might slow down the request execution a lot. Right? In Lucee, not so much, but in general, you shouldn't. But I tend to leave it on all the time. Right? So why would you want to use it? Pretty clear. Gives you all the information about what happens in the request. Well, not all the information, but very important information about what happens in a request. Like, for instance, what queries have been used, or what files have been used, which files have been slow, and stuff like that. Right?
So it can help you if you're trying to figure out some problem with your code, why it's running slow or why it's not working right.
Yes. Well, it is not, let me put it this way. It is not really pinpointing to the exact location. Well, sometimes it does. If you, for instance, have a very slow query execution, then you know that this is the problem that you should look at. And so if you have a 10-second execution and 9.5 seconds is one single query, then you know that that is your issue. And you can easily see that from the debugging information. But if it's, for instance, one file, you will just see that that file is the slow one. If the file is huge and massive, you of course have to go into details there and just do timers or get tick counts and what have you to introspect that, or use something like the one of the products that is coming up from us, or Fusion Reactor, I guess, has something like the request introspections or whatever it's called.
Yeah. All right. So there are some pre-built ones that come with Adobe ColdFusion or come with Lucee CFML.
Yeah.
Why the heck would you want to write your own?
Well, the thing is that when you're writing a language, a programming language, you of course have to kind of find a middle ground for displaying information which would satisfy everyone, right? So this is how I would display the queries. This is how I would display the files and stuff like that. But this is, of course, just the common ground. There is so much more information in the debugging struct that you get, that Lucee returns you in our case, that you can use that information to do all different kinds of other things. Like, for instance, just a simple thing. Warn me if my session is larger than, I don't know, 50 kilobytes or something like that. Or, I don't know, give me the hierarchy of the execution of the template so that you know this template has been called by that one and that execution took so and so much. That information is in the debugging template, in the debugging struct, in the debugging information, but nobody outputs it. Or how many of my query columns have been used, in fact, right? Or what the dumps are that I'm using in my code, because you can tell Lucee to dump the results into the debugging template and not display them on the page in the first place, right? So stuff like that. Now,
it sounds handy to be able to do that.
Yes, it is. And go ahead.
But is it really, do you have to be like a genius level ColdFusion developer to write these things,
absolutely.
or is it standard ColdFusion code? Or?
Well, absolutely. We wrote it very, very difficult. We made it very, very difficult to handle because we want to sell our consulting services. No, not at all. It is general plain CFML. So writing a debugging template is just working on a CFC. The CFC has an init method and a body, and in the body you define kind of the arguments that are coming from your definition of your debugging template. So when you go to the admin and select the template you want to use, it allows you to pass in some arguments. And these arguments will come into the CFC. Then you have an output method, and this output method receives the whole struct containing all the information. What you do in that output method is completely up to you. So it is a simple struct containing several keys, containing maybe queries, arrays, and stuff like that. It's pretty simple. What you can do at first, just dump whatever there is, and then have a look and come up with some ideas on how to interpret that data. I have written 2 or 3 debugging templates in the past, and so I can tell you about the history of these debugging templates. I wrote a debugging template called Debugging to Console, and Debugging to Console was just kind of writing the debugging into the background somewhere, and then you had a debugging console where you could have had a look at all the debugging entries from everywhere, but the actual page that you were calling didn't have any debugging output below that. Now this has made its way now into Lucee, and Lucee has this debugging console in the administration. I will show that in the talk so that people can relate to that and that they understand what's going on there. Yeah.
So one thing I'm wondering is what happens if you have a bug in your debugging template code?
You just get an error saying, okay, something like, okay, that file is not defined. Then the error template is called instead of the debugging template, but just below, because the debugging template is something that will be called separately from your request. So your request will run regularly and normally, and then below you will have your error template displaying the error that you have. So it's not really a big deal.
Okay, so it's not like when you have an error in an error handling template.
Or if you have an error in an event gateway or an AJAX call, something which you have no idea whether it's not happening. Yeah.
Okay, so it's pretty easy to write these yourself, or to take someone else that comes with the language and just tweak around with it to make it do what you want.
Yeah. I can tell you in the last 15 years, I've seen one single person that has written its own debugging template besides the Lucee core developers. Right?
Well, maybe there's an opportunity here for people to get better info.
Yeah, perhaps that is an opportunity, especially now with the skills or the techniques that are available there with jQuery doing stuff there in the background and stuff. Decorating your data, your debugging data with additional data that you can request from the application is not really that hard, right? So you can just simply have an additional file that you call there, which gives you additional information to whatever you want to see there, right? But just people are not using it, and people are not used to use these debugging templates to fix their issues, to understand better what kind of code they're writing there. Right, what mistakes they do.
Right. So are you actually in your talk at CFObjective, are you going to, show people how to do this themselves, or?
Well, I hope so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show them show them how to understand the data, how to write such a CFC, what happens once the CFC is done, and how it interacts with Lucee. And what I can give them is a really very great, shiny debugging template that I have written, which is my favorite debugging template as of lately. And that helps me really a lot focus exactly on what I need. One of the things there is, if you have, for instance, a ColdFusion, ColdBox application, and you want to focus on, say, one single file and all the queries and everything that's descending from there, it will kind of be buried under those thousands of calls and thousands of queries, etc. And I wrote a debugging template that allows me to say, I want to debug this one and all the descendants of this one, and only see that information which is related to that, nothing else.
Oh, so instead of getting pages and pages of debugging info you get with the default template, you can narrow it down just to the stuff you're interested in.
Exactly. So that is what I wrote about a half a year ago, and I'm still using it, and I love it. And I will spread it with the world, and they can use it then. It's fine.
Fabulous. So how is Lucee error handling different from Adobe ColdFusion?
Well, I wouldn't say Lucee error handling or Lucee debugging. Lucee debugging is different because Lucee error handling is the same way as it works in ColdFusion. I guess this comes from the misunderstanding that we had at the beginning that it is not a Lucee error template, it's a Lucee debugging template, right? So I suppose this question was something that was related to that, but there are differences in Lucee debugging templates versus ColdFusion debugging templates as well. ColdFusion, as maybe some people know, has one administrator per server where ColdFusion runs, or per instance. And that means you can turn on your debugging template for all of your sites or not, right? Whereas in ColdFusion, in Lucee, you will have a Lucee administrator for every of your single individual websites that are in the same instance. And you can have all different kinds of debugging templates turned on for one site and turned off for the other site. And what you can do as well is within the same site, you could say this IP address gets that debugging template and this IP address gets that debugging template. So you could even do, in a weird scenario, you could even do something like Google Analytics in your debugging template if you so wish, right? That would be added to every single page. I mean, this is stupid, but I mean, just to make a case for it. So you could definitely have different debugging templates for every single individual IP address, right? Yeah, so that's what the bigger difference there is.
So it sounds like you do a lot of debugging. Can you tell us some Jedi debugger tips?
Well, some Jedi debugger tips. I know that I actually had a big issue that I have introduced in a debugging template that we were able to that you were executing on the within Rila back in the days. So what I did back then, I wrote a when you output the queries in the debugging template, I had a button there, say, which says play, and you could just replay that SQL statement just to get the content of that query that was pulled with this SQL statement. And that call was actually a call of the server added and passing in the form scope the SQL statement. And of course, Pete Freitag came a few months later saying, hey, guy, you have an issue there with SQL statements. I could pass on a drop database in there. And it was just wide open. So you have to be very careful with that. But debugging Jedi tricks. So for me, what is really very important is you can turn on or off the SQL Server usage, or the SQL, sorry, not SQL Server, SQL usage. That is a tick box in the administrator. And the tick box in the administrator enables Lucee to survey what columns of your queries you're actually using. So if you're pulling select star from something, but you're only using 2 columns, it will complain and say, hey, listen, you're only using 3% of your columns. wouldn't you narrow that down? That is that one tick box. And the other tick box, which is a very useful tick box in development, is the implicit variable access. The implicit variable access is something like the what was it called? Ray Camden's tool, the one that introspects whether you have localized all your variables. VAR-scope checker, yes. It was called VAR-scope checker, where you were looking whether in your methods of your CFCs you had vars with every of your variables that you didn't intend to end up in the variable scope of the component. And it is kind of like a VAR-scope scope checker on steroids. Lucee will check every single access to a variable and see whether it has to jump through many hoops to get that variable. Because in CFML, there is this stupid invention that you can call a variable, or you can invoke a variable by just using the name without a scope. And if necessary, CFML, Lucee, or ColdFusion will hunt down the variable somewhere in one of the scopes. That is very bad technique, by the way. And if you want to get rid of those, what you can do is you can just check this box, and it will tell you all the variables that you have accessed without explicitly scoping them, except for the local and the variable scope. Those two are the only scopes that you shouldn't scope in the first place. And this is working all the time. So it is really literally at that point in Lucee where the variables are accessed, so it will not fail. Now, the thing is just this costs you 30%, give or take 30% of performance. So only enable that in development and nowhere else. Right? That is a very nice feature to use if you want to speed up your code as well. Right? There are tons of other things, but I don't want to give everything away because nobody's going to show up in the session afterwards, right?
Yeah, and I'm not just talking about what you're going to talk about in your session, but also, just things you do when you're debugging code.
Well, when I debug code, the first thing that I will do, and that is a takeaway that I do from every single from that talk that I did about performance, is that if I have a code that I'm analyzing for performance or for bugs, I write it from tag to script or from script to tag. Now you might go, why would you want to do that? Well, very simple. It is not for performance reasons or something. It is just for me to understand the code. If I rewrite it and it still works, I have maybe understood the code, right? Mostly I write from tag to script because mostly people are converting from tag to script. But that is the first thing that I do. And that gives me a feeling for the code. And I understand what the code does. And while writing that, my head always goes like, I would have written this a different way. Or this is much more performant. So while I'm rewriting it, I already think about alternatives and how to improve the code. Right? So that is it's just like the code monkey. I guess you know the code monkey, right? Where you tell
tell us about the code monkey.
Well, that is something, the first time I heard about this was from Mark Drew. And just recently I learned about it from 9gag. I don't know if you know 9gag. That's a very famous app on iPhone or iPad, just funny stuff. And it's a lot with gaming and computing and programming. And the code monkey is a monkey that you sit next to your laptop or computer, and if you're kind of stuck with a problem, you try to verbally tell that problem to the code monkey. Because I'm pretty sure that it has happened to you very often that you're stuck in a problem, and then you explain the problem to somebody else. And as soon as you explained it, you go, oh, I know how to fix it, right? I'm sure that has happened to you. It has happened to me a lot.
Oh, yeah.
The same thing is here with the code monkey. The code monkey forces you to verbalize the problem that you have. And by verbalizing, you're transferring it. It's just like me converting it from tag to script. Transform it into normal words, and that helps you understand the problem. And then you know better how to fix it.
Right. I've done that. Phone up a friend and explain what you're doing, and halfway through the phone call, they don't solve it, but you figure, oh, I did this stupid thing.
So you can tell your friend that he was your code monkey. Yeah. Yeah.
That is a great thing. I almost want like a little cuddly monkey to stick next to my computer to
Yeah.
talk to, you know.
Yeah, well, Mark has his dogs. We have our dog and a cat as well, so we can explain to our dogs what issues we have. Hi to JR. JR is Mark Drew's first dog. Yeah.
So yeah, talk to your pets as well. But
Exactly.
anything that helps you go through the code, can do
Yeah.
that. I mean, one of the things I used to do when debugging is I'd make a copy of the code, or maybe the whole app, depending on if I didn't quite know where the bug was. And then I'd just start ruthlessly hacking pieces out of the code until I couldn't get the bug to occur. And the last piece of code I cut out was related to the bug.
Yeah. Yeah. And one other thing that that comes to mind regarding the debugging tricks. What I do as well is just really, as you just said, I cut out pieces from the code until the error doesn't happen anymore. Kind of just narrowing down the problem until it doesn't happen anymore. Right? Just like if you're using an inner join, several inner joins in your SQL statement, and you don't get any data, so you just do a left join until, or you just delete that until you see data finally, and then you know, okay, there is the issue.
Yeah, I think debugging SQL is a whole other skill set. It's really not quite as friendly a language as ColdFusion, to be honest.
That is true, but I'm a very huge fan of SQL and a very huge fan of databases. That was kind of the thing which I did before I came to ColdFusion or to CFML. First time I saw it, I thought, oh God, what is this? Really?
Well, and I think with SQL in particular, just being really anal about how you format it, and even indenting the SQL so you can see, does everything match up the way you thought it matched up?
Yes, that is true. That is true. You know, I work a lot with Teradata lately, and the Teradata SQL Explorer is really, it really sucks. I'm sorry, excuse the language, but it really, I don't like it. Even though Teradata, a great database and everything, but sometimes really debugging a SQL statement in Teradata. You see my gray hair over here? Sure.
Oh yeah, that was from Teradata.
No, but still, I really love writing database queries and optimize stuff there. Not a big fan of ORM, hence.
Right. I mean, I actually do think that there's a different skill set involved in being able to debug code versus being able to write code. And some people are really good at debugging and they're not so good at coding, and some vice versa. So
yeah, you know what people are always telling me, and about 400 or 500 years ago, if we were doing programming back then, I would have been burned as being a wizard or a bad wizard because of that. Because you know, sometimes if people are telling me an issue about an issue, they explain to me the issue, and I don't know how this works, but after a certain amount of time, when it comes close to the issue, my brain kind of snaps and it says, oh, wait, please go back and explain that to me. I don't know how that works, but it just works. And then he goes into detail about that particular issue, and then he tells me that again, and then again, the same thing happens. My brain kind of goes, and then, oh, there is your issue. That's the problem. I don't know how that works, but I just sometimes notice that whenever somebody tells me, I try to follow, and as soon as my brain can't follow anymore, I know that there might be an issue, right?
Well, it's just your intuition speaking to you.
Yeah, that's my female side, I suppose.
Yes, there you go. So maybe a few hundred years ago, you might have been burnt for the stake because you were getting debugging info from your intuition.
Exactly.
But now I think we can openly admit that sometimes we get intuitive nudges. And I think everyone listening has had the experience that you're trying to debug some code and you go take a walk or you sleep on it or you take a shower and suddenly you're like, oh yeah, I know where that problem is.
Yeah, that is true. And especially when it is other people's code, right? That is sometimes because you have to then think as they would think, right? And sometimes
sounds painful.
Yeah, it sounds painful. But I love doing it. You know, there is nothing more pleasing than complaining about other people's code. Yeah.
So let's switch to a few other topics here. You mentioned earlier that you were born in Romania, you lived in Germany, and now you're in Switzerland, and you just got married, I think you mentioned.
Yeah,
so congratulations.
I got married. Yeah, thank you. Got married last year to a Swiss girl. Actually, my boss.
Fabulous. And you're going to become Swiss, I think.
Yeah, next year I'm going to become a Swiss. I was just lazy to apply for it. But I moved 29 times in my life, so quite a lot.
Wow.
And the longest place that I've stayed is actually where I am right now. So I'm in Switzerland now for 20 years. And I've never been I've moved a couple of times here in Switzerland as well. But in this place where I'm right now, I'm here for 12 years already.
And Switzerland's a very interesting country because it's very federal model. You know, all the cantons and the cities and the federal government all sort of share the money and the power, which is pretty unique in the world. You wish they would?
Well, yeah, I wish they would share the money. Well, the power, yes, they do, because, you know, every second week we go have election week or election day, and you have certain petitions that people can file, like you need to have 100,000 signatures to file for a certain petition, and then you can decide about certain things to happen or not to happen. So that's why it's called direct democracy, and I really like that. I really like that a lot. The only thing that I don't like is that sometimes the explanations on what things, how laws should be or what they're deciding upon are very kind of complicated. And there is one small flaw in the whole thing. You get a small booklet, and that booklet explains to you what you're deciding upon. And at the end, it says the government is, how do you say it? The government is proposing to you to do this, right? Which is bad, because a lot of people are going, oh, this is way too complicated. What does the government say? Okay, let's do that, right? So that is wrong, because they shouldn't say that. They should just much more simple explain to you what this is all about. Right?
Maybe the whole democracy process needs a debugging template so you can understand what the proposal is.
And I'm sure I'm trying to do something about that. We have some other ideas. There. But I think Switzerland is really a very great country. It is unfortunately one of the most expensive country in the world. But hey, everywhere I go, it's cheaper, right? So but still, sometimes it's really crazy about what you're paying for a beer or something. It's $12, crazy. And
you just have to make your own.
Well, we're not in America where everyone is homegrown. But
I'm sure that Brad has probably got a Raspberry Pi CFML project that would totally control the beer production process. You know?
That is true. But anyway, that's a whole different topic regarding Switzerland and all the things.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about all of those things, but I think we need more.
No, just curious.
10, minutes.
Yeah, no, we've only got a few minutes left, and we want to talk about Lucee and Rila. But I am curious how many languages you speak, because you're speaking excellent English, but you must have learned Romanian and German. How many other languages do you speak?
Well, I speak, I guess, 6 or so languages. The thing is, Mark Drew has always a very nice quote about me. You know, your English is really almost impeccable. I know you're doing something wrong. I have no idea what. But you're doing something wrong, and that's funny. You know, I would have loved to have the perfect English, because, you know, the colloquialisms are missing sometimes. But I would have loved to have the perfect English. But hey, you know, people need to know that I'm not from the States, and they excuse my variable names, right? The
long German variable names.
Yeah, long German variable names with umlauts and everything. Nonetheless, I speak a lot of German, mostly.
Do you think that helps you in your programming? Because you mentioned earlier you had to get yourself in the head of the other programmer to understand that code. Do you think actually speaking multiple languages?
Maybe the comments. You know, just recently I talked to a guy in Brazil, and
Yeah.
he knew absolutely no English at all. And he was talking to me, or he was chatting to me over Skype with Google Translate. And it was kind of hilarious to kind of sometimes read something which I really couldn't make sense of it at all. And I had to ask him twice or three times, what do you mean? And then he used a different translator, and then it made sense, right? So it was kind of very funny. But I don't think that knowing many languages makes it easier, but what it does, it makes you more tolerant. Especially if you're traveling a lot. If you're staying in the same country all the time, you have a very narrow-minded way of thinking about things. But the more you go to different countries, the more you go, okay, here it is like that, that's fine. Here they're using miles, so what? It's a little longer than a kilometer, who cares? The ant doesn't care whether it is a mile or a kilometer. So, you get a lot more tolerant regarding national habits, and you don't take them very seriously. Right?
Well, I think that's important when working with other developers to not take things too personally. So bearing that in mind, what did you learn from the Rila project?
What did I learn from the Rila project? What it learned me is that life is not endless, and that we should live our life while we can. Because getting angry about things, especially in the end, is not worth it, right? We try to move things, we try to bring things to the world, and try to improve things for the CFML community since day one when I started with the Rila project. And in the end, it was no fun anymore. So we had to do some changes there, and we did. And since then, I'm really happy that I'm now kind of free, and we can care again about the CFML community, and be the thing, or be as strong as we were before, and as helpful as we were before. It was really a very nice and very long journey. I still love Rila, right? So there are no bad feelings regards anything. Maybe a couple of situations could have been different, but I won't go into very many details there, because you leave that behind in your head as well. You try to make things better, and you try to improve for the future, so that you don't do the same mistakes again. And it gave me a lot.
That sounds a good thing, to leave things in the past behind.
Yeah.
How do you manage to do that? Because I'm sure some people listening would love to be able to just let go of some stuff in their past, in their programming career.
That's a broad question, right? A bold question. The thing is, what is important is, there is one thing. I told that to my kids as well. There is nobody better in the world than you. You know why? Because you won't get anyone else. That's just you. So finally admit it, that you're the best person in the world. You are, because you can't be somebody else. And if something's not the way you want it to be, you have to change your attitude towards it, or change yourself. And that's what I've done for the last 2 or 3 years. I try to live my life more kind of, it's just like the Ferris Bueller quote, where you say, life's so fast, if you're not stopping to look around every now and then, you might miss it, right? And that is true. We're here for a brief time, and we should just give it our best, because how can we spread happiness if we're not happy, right? So that's what I try to do. And being a Lucee developer, or being a Lucee evangelist, makes me happy. And I try to make other people programming's life happier.
I think being happy is a good way to get better work done, get better code written. So get on better with other people, and also, making the conscious decision to be happy actually does make me happier. It's kind of weird, but it seems to work.
Yeah, it is true.
So if folks listening are thinking, how could they contribute to the Lucee CFML, or how could they help out some way? What could they do?
Well, it is very easy to complain about other things. Like, for instance, okay, hey, the documentation for this is missing, or why wouldn't you document blah, or whatever. We have invested really loads and loads of time and money into Lucee. And of course, we have forgotten things, and maybe we haven't documented things so that you can come to us and ask us for consulting. No, the thing is that sometimes we just didn't have time, or we just forgot to do it. So the best way to help the Lucee project is to get involved, to go to lang.lucee.org, start a discussion, become a supporter of Lucee. Just go to the lucee.org website and sign up as a supporter. It's just $9 a month. And it helps the Lucee project as well. The Lucee project is just there to fund the Lucee development, nothing else. There are no commercial interests. It's just a non-for-profit organization. And the Lucee development and the spreading of the name is the only thing that this is for. And if you have a larger company, why not become a member? Then you can have influence on where Lucee is going to head in the next few years. Are we going to create a headless Lucee version? Are we going to create a serverless Lucee version? Is it going to run on, I don't know, an iPhone or whatever? Well, that's up to you then if you become a member and decide to become part of the management, decide where the direction of Lucee is going to go. And my company, Raja, where I'm working at, is one of the founding members of Lucee. And I'm really happy to give loads of my time to help bring Lucee forward as well. So why don't you guys do it as well? Because it's the thing that you love, the thing that you work with every day. And why not contribute something back instead of complaining, right? I mean, complaining is good, maybe moves things. But the better thing is just do it yourself, fix it immediately.
Yeah, and because Lucee's open source, you can have a chance to do that fixing if you want to.
Yeah.
Or help debug it.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't fix it yourself, but you can here are the different cases where this problem occurs, and that helps someone else who is trying to fix it narrow it down a lot quicker.
Exactly.
So, great suggestion. So, should people listening go to ColdFusion conferences, or what and why?
Well, the thing is, I know sometimes the employers are deciding over the heads of people whether or not to go to conferences. And very many times you don't have the chance to go to conferences. But what is really invaluable at conferences, you get to meet other people, you get to meet other mindsets, you get to meet other ways how people are solving issues. You get to meet the developers and the core people behind the languages. You can ask them stuff. You can leave an impression. You can do very much. You can interact with these guys. You can. They're really very, very bright guys at these conferences. CFObjective especially has been always the conference where the guys in the audience could have been the guys on stage and vice versa, because it is a very high-level conference. And I always loved going there and talking and having the privilege to talk. I had the privilege to give the keynote a few times, and it was really always very inspiring. And I loved that conference, especially working with Stephen Howard is a pleasure as always. And going to conferences really gives you a feeling of, okay, I'm part of something. I'm part of the community. And I'm not just somebody in a curb in a small box programming whatever my employer tells me to do. It is being part of something bigger. That's what conferences are.
Why are you proud to use ColdFusion?
I'm proud to use ColdFusion. Well, ColdFusion, I don't use that much ColdFusion. I mostly use Lucee. I use CFML. Why am I proud? Well, I am proud maybe because I was one of the key members that allowed the language to survive, or allowed the language to exist. And I had some influence on the development of the language as well. And obviously, just like you having your baby, see how your baby evolves and teach it some new skills, and you're proud of that baby. And me using Lucee all day as a day job makes me really proud. And if there is something about the language I don't like, I maybe help change it. And you don't always have the opportunity to do that with other languages, because your influence as a programmer might be very small. But being at the core gives me a little bit of influence, and backing the project there as well gives me a little bit of influence. And it makes me proud to see that other people are using it as well, and that we are allowing an industry to survive or to flourish even still. We've seen the numbers of ColdFusion users going down over the last 10, 15 years. But over the last 1 year maybe, it is stagnating. And sometimes I think that it is going back up again, which is great. And I think that it is really a very good time to start using ColdFusion or Lucee again, because, lots of companies are out there that have ColdFusion applications running. Maybe old applications, maybe new ones. And one thing that they search really the most is ColdFusion developers. So I'm pretty sure you're making a lot better money than a PHP developer if you're a ColdFusion developer with some skills. And that maybe could be a very good argument to try to learn ColdFusion or CFML as fast as you can and use it as your project or as your pet project, if you like so.
Okay, I'm just going to pause. So what would it take to make ColdFusion even more alive, Gert? This year?
This year? Well, talk about it. That is important. Talk about it, blog about it, use it for applications, go on CF Alive and talk to Michael Smith and tell it how great it is. We have loads of people saying how bad it is and how old-fashioned and old code of whatever. Tell them that it's not true and why it's not true, because the ones that are using it heavily know that it is not true and that we are trying to keep the language as modern as possible and improve it as and make it as fast as possible and as competitive as possible. So it's mostly really, again, talk about it and some chatter about it and do these video recordings with Michael.
Yes. Well, I'd love anyone listening who wants to be interviewed, just drop me an email, michael@terratech.com, or you can, I also just put up a thing where you can leave me a voice message if you want to leave comments or questions on the Terratech podcast page for CF Alive. So,
okay.
Happy to share feedback in future episodes from listeners. So thanks so much for being with us, Gert. If people want to reach you, how would they find you?
Well, they can just use my email address, gert@raisia.ch, R-A-I-S-I. God damn it, I have never spelled it in. Let me just write it down.
We'll put it in the show notes.
RASIA.ch.
Yes.
I never had to spell it before like that. Anyway, that's where you can reach me, or Gert_Raisia, my Twitter handle, or Gert.Franz, my Skype handle. Just drop me a note and I'll be happy to help. And Michael, I guess we'll meet again in, when is it, in 6 weeks in Washington.
6 weeks, yes. CFObjective in Washington, D.C. for the first time this year instead of Minneapolis. It's going to be in the East Coast, a lot easier for people to get to, I think. So
yeah,
I was speaking to Stephen Hauer and he said he thought it would be, that's one of the reasons they moved it. Getting to Minneapolis is not the easiest place to get to.
That is true. That is true.
And there are one or two more tourist attractions in Washington, D.C. So,
and one that has become a lesser attraction. Okay, forget it. Yes, so all is fine. I love going to Washington. Really, one of the greatest places in the States, and I really love being back there.
Great. Well, look forward to seeing you again. And thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yes. Thank you very much, Michael. See you soon and take care. Bye-bye.